Hey guys, Peter Franson here from christiangeekcentral.com and Spirit Blade Productions. Well, right now I'm going to share my thoughts reacting to Xbox Bethesda's two showcases. Between the main showcase and their extended showcase, Xbox had a lot of games to show, all scheduled to arrive in the next 12 months. Many of them were not for me in either their gameplay or aesthetic style, and there were definitely a lot of indies. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but it does remind us that they still have a ways to go to really get rolling on these big AAA games coming from studios that they have acquired in recent years. On my radar, I'm just going to share thoughts on just a few games here. On my radar, Redfall. This one was delayed, made by Arcane Studios, known for Prey and Dishonored. And this one, unlike their past games, is playable in multiplayer, but I would probably only play it in single player. Looks like a first-person type of game where you're taking advantage of the atmosphere and your different powers and abilities, your skills, depending on the class you choose, to overcome enemies and situations in creative ways. It's got an interesting hodgepodge of ideas. You know, there's a sniper class, there's a very sci-fi gadget user class with a robot buddy, there's a class with Green Lantern-style energy constructs that the character can create, and then all of these classes are going up against vampires, and I'm like, is this Ready Player One? What is the common thing, the common idea that resulted in a world that has all these weird, unique elements existing in it all at once? And so, while it looks like a solid game in terms of its visual quality, I need to know so much more about the systems and gameplay and about the uniting lore to figure out if I'm going to be interested in Redfall. There's also an interesting brief reference to a pastor by the main character in the gameplay, and I'm wondering if that's somehow related to the vampire lore. Vampires can be treated supernaturally and, you know, traditionally will recoil at the sight of crosses and things like that. But other times vampires are treated as purely biological in nature. There's nothing supernatural going on. It's a biological disease of some kind. So the reference to a pastor says to me, okay, maybe these are supernatural in some way. We'll see what happens, and whether or not the use of this reference to this pastor implies anything about Christianity or some form of Christianity. Probably Catholicism would be the way. Well, I call it a pastor, not a priest. So I don't know. I'm just curious to see what role some form of Christianity may or may not play in this game. But anyway, that's Redfall. We'll see if it's if it's for me or not sometime in 2023. Also coming in 2023 is Diablo 4. I've enjoyed Diablo-style games in the past, usually not the Diablo games themselves as much as some of the imitators, but this one is an open-world game compared to past games in the Diablo series, has a darker visual aesthetic, actually looks a lot like Path of Exile, with a very muted color palette and the bright colors largely removed. I don't get hooked by most games in this genre today. There's too much swarming in combat, or the combat just starts feeling samey for other reasons after a while, but I'm curious to see if Diablo 4 can revive my interest in the genre with some fresh ideas. It also has couch co-op, which I'm always on the lookout for as a possible option for me to play with my wife or my boys. But Starfield, I'll spend most of my time talking about this one. This is coming from the guys, the studio that made Skyrim and Fallout, 3 and 4. And it's been described by the lead developer loosely as Skyrim in space. So I'm very much interested in this, having loved their past open-world RPGs. The aesthetic is interesting. It has almost it leans toward black and white with a few bursts of color here and there. I'm wondering what we'll see as we explore the purported 1,000+ worlds, if we're going to see more variety. I would hope and actually think so. This is very early on. I imagine there's a lot more to be revealed about this game, but it is interesting that it's largely monochromatic, with colors kind of being a little bit of the exception compared to what you see when the man-made structures come into play, like the space stations and the ships and stuff. It looks very NASA-inspired, which they've said that was intentional. It's also interesting to see exploration be a significant part of gameplay, not necessarily just combat and blowing up everything you see. The main character comes across an alien and a creature and just allows them actually to pass and go about their lives. And so I'm interested, in a game that encourages exploration, as all their games in the past do, so that's unsurprising. What is interesting is to see how they're apparently taking inspiration from No Man's Sky with a mining laser that is used to acquire components for crafting and all kinds of stuff, related to that. Traversal also reminds me a bit of No Man's Sky, with a jetpack that allows you to leap tall buildings in a single bound and slow your descent, break your fall from jumping off a cliff or something like that. There is a little bit of combat that they show here and there, and thankfully it doesn't look too complicated with really, complex enemy AI, but largely enemies that run in, look menacing, and allow me to shoot them, which is, really mostly what I want. I'm not interested in super challenging combat. There is a lockpicking game, as you could, guess would be the case given their past games, but it looks like the minigame itself is significantly different from the one that is basically the same between both Fallout and Skyrim. But there is, if you look closely, an auto-picking option of some kind, so presumably if we get tired of this lock-picking game as well, there is a way to get around it. A big news for me about Starfield did not come from this presentation, but actually a tweet from Bethesda outside of it, and that is confirming that your protagonist is voiceless, and dialogue takes place in first-person view. Why is that exciting for me? Because when you have a voiced protagonist, and when you show that protagonist talking during dialogue, as were the case in Fallout 4, it takes away options of how I would want to play that character and think of that character behaving. It kind of locks them into a personality or a narrow cluster of personalities. But when the protagonist is silent, then in my mind I can add subtext and sarcasm or whatever to the dialogue that I'm selecting, and I can add mannerisms in my mind for how that character that I'm playing might choose to express themselves. That can all be in my headcanon and allows me to play the character, imagine the character more the way that I want to imagine them. So that is actually very, very good news for me, something that I've wanted Bethesda to return to as quickly as possible after seeing what they did in Fallout 4. Facial animations don't look like, cutting edge, but they seem to be greatly improved from past facial animations. The spaceship stuff is interesting to me. You can build and customize your spaceships. I'm wondering what space combat will be like. I'm not very good at the space combat in No Man's Sky, so I'm hoping it's going to be more of a Star Trek kind of experience than a Star Wars type of combat experience, but we'll see. Hopefully some things will be able to be automated and auto-targeted and that kind of stuff for me. Let's see. Oh, and I'm also hoping that there'll be the ability to kind of salvage spaceships, maybe that you find, or that you can build up and kit out to look great and then sell them to make money that way. I always wanted to do that in No Man's Sky, and they haven't allowed that kind of system in the game yet, so I'm hoping to see something like that here. But either way, it looks like the spaceship customization is going to be a lot more rewarding and practical than the settlement building in Fallout 4. So looking forward to exploring all the spaceship options for engagement in this game. You can reportedly explore anywhere on the planets that you visit, and there are over 1,000 of them. Now, they have said that a lot of those planets are just going to be for mining. They're not going to have a lot of really interesting stuff going on them, but there still will be a lot that are presumably going to be very interesting to explore and discover what's on them. But with 1,000+ planets, there's got to be some kind of procedural generation involved, and they have said as much. Todd Howard at the end of the presentation said, "We can't wait to see what you find," and I can't help but wonder if that's because they don't know what people are going to find, because they haven't explored all these procedurally generated environments themselves. So, but for me, the major thing that I want to see procedural generation do, which I believe they talked about a long time ago, and maybe Todd Howard in an interview talked about wanting to explore this more, is not so much procedural generation in the environments, but procedural generation in questing, which we already see Bethesda doing in Skyrim and in Fallout 4, where you can have these like assassination missions where you go out and you assassinate this person. You come back and you get paid for it. And those quests are just basically, they're very basic in nature, and they just regenerate over and over and over again endlessly. And I'm curious to see what's the more complex version of that. Can they procedurally generate story elements to those kinds of things that you go out and do? That's what I'm hoping we'll see kind of a breakthrough in, and that'll make all the difference as to whether or not I feel like exploring all these 1,000 plus procedurally generated planets. So that's what I'm really eagerly anticipating more information about. As far as themes, they do seem to be putting some pieces in place to explore some philosophical, spiritual themes in this game. In the gameplay they featured, the main character is said to have been exposed to an artifact and seen visions as a result of that. There's someone that's selling, I believe, a sword, and they said that the previous owner, or the person who found it or owned it before, said that the sword spoke to him. So evidently there will be these things you can encounter in the world that will give you these revelations of some kind, maybe about the fundamental nature of the universe or our origins as humans or something like that. That's a lot of what I see getting explored in moments like this, in things like Mass Effect or whatever. There's some kind of like revelation about our past as humans that is revealed in these kinds of things. So there are also at least 3 religious factions or groups or whatever that you can make as a part of your character's history that when you look at the details, even though they might sound like words that we know of today associated with philosophical or religious beliefs, they are in their descriptions different in some way. So the first is universal, the second is enlightened, and the third is serpent's embrace. And given that there's a reference to a soul system, which would be our system presumably, and seeming references to the United States and possibly NASA, as other analysts have kind of like discovered as they really scrape this gameplay footage for information, those things all indicate that this story does take place in our universe, a universe in which Jesus of Nazareth lived and died, so it's possible that the religious options take inspiration from real-world religions, but maybe are several jumps removed, such as, say, the Children of the Atom and other religions in Fallout. But while those served the game's humor in Fallout, Starfield seems pretty serious, so I'm curious what their serious take on religious representation will be. We'll all find out together, I suppose, hopefully sometime in 2023. Finally, Stalker 2 was featured, and largely they highlighted the Ukrainian developers whose lives have been turned upside down because of the war in Ukraine, and that was just a good reminder to me that it's okay for our leisure to be invaded by kind of meta things that are associated with the game, whether that's something tragic like what's going on with the Ukrainian developers, or whether it has something to do with developers who are making worldview claims in their game that we vehemently disagree with, that really rub us the wrong way, that's okay to allow the Holy Spirit to move us, if we are willing, to prayer in those moments. Hit the pause button and pray for people in Ukraine, or for that developer that is holding to a worldview that's self-destructive or harmful in some way. I think that we should be open to those kinds of things instead of segmenting and saying, no, this is my me time, this is my recharging time. Yes, entertainment is good for refreshing and recharging, but I think we should also be open to being taken out of our entertainment for things that the Holy Spirit might want us to pray about and think about. So anyway, I thought that was a nice moment at the end of the presentation, their focus on Stalker 2. And those are all my thoughts for now. If you're looking for more of my thoughts on different game news this summer, check out the Christian Geek Central podcast, where I will be sharing reactions to things that don't make it onto the YouTube channel. But those are all of my thoughts for now. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.